We are studying the text of the Yoga of Integral Knowledge, and here Sri Aurobindo has described two stages. The first stage, in which there is a preparation and a purification of the soul and its instruments to be fit for the second stage, which is the actual illumination and the realization. But for the purpose of purification, the first necessity and the most important part of the purification in the path of knowledge is the purification of the understanding. And this is to a great extent dependent on the purification of the other parts, because in the normal human working, everything is entangled with each other. But still, it is this purification of the understanding which is the key by which all other parts can also be purified. But what he means by understanding, he says, is the nearest English equivalent of the term buddhi. And the buddhi itself is not the sense mind. It is not the rendering of perceptions by the conceptual part of the mind, nor is it the constant leaping current of habitual thoughts, which for mass of humanity takes the place of the proper understanding in the mind. But by understanding, he means the part which perceives, judges, and discriminates. And this pure intellectual understanding consists of disinterested observation, judgment, and reasoning. But this is only the lower part of the buddhi. The word buddhi is used to describe a still higher function, of which this intellectual understanding is a secondary or a reflected working. And this higher function is not intelligence which understands, but it is vision which stands above. He uses the word overstanding in knowledge. It stands above the knowledge. It does not seek it or attain it by subjection to data. It already possesses the knowledge and brings it out in terms of a revelatory and intuitional thought. And this higher buddhi is what is the primary focus, although the lower buddhi is still a step towards that. And if this higher buddhi can act free of interference of the lower parts, it would give pure forms of the truth, and the normal functioning of observation would be replaced by a vision. Imagination would give place to an inspiration of the truth. Reasoning will give place to spontaneous discernment of relations, and conclusion from the reasoning will give place to intuition, which holds the full perception of the relationships without needing to build upon them. And finally, judgment will give place to a thought vision in which things stand revealed directly in that light of the truth. Memory takes upon itself a larger sense, which is not only the tiny bit that we accumulate in life and hold in a very mixed manner, but it would include a much vaster store of all experience and knowledge, including not only the past, but also the future. And it is towards this, he says, that we are all intended to grow. And this is a higher faculty of truth-conscious knowledge, which is as yet a privilege of the gods beyond present human nature, but it is part of our human destiny that we are intended to grow into it. So this is so far as we have been studying over the last few weeks. And now Sri Aurobindo goes into the specifics of how this understanding, buddhi, has to be purified. And he discusses three kinds of purification that it must undergo, and all three involve a mixture with a certain lower working or the lower part of our mental working. So before he gets into that, he explains what we mean by purification in this context. He says, we see then what we mean precisely by the understanding and by that higher faculty which we may call, for the sake of convenience, the ideal faculty, and which stands to the developed intellect much in the same relation as the intellect stands to the half animal reason of the undeveloped man. So this status of the higher functioning of buddhi, he calls ideal faculty for convenience. And why ideal? It is because if we were to observe the working of the intellect and then push it in our own conception of how much better it can be and how much better and how much better, we come to a kind of a conception of how we would like or how we perceive that intelligence to be potentially. There are many interesting imaginations of this kind which you will find discussed in science fiction. Recently, there was a movie, the name slips my mind, I think it is Lucy. It came about 2 years ago, in which this idea is played with. And the story goes like this, that this young girl is given some drugs to carry illegally, and it is inserted in the body, but the pouch breaks and the drugs get into her bloodstream. It's a new experimental drug which enhances the mind's faculties. So as the drug seeps into her blood, all of a sudden, all the powers of her mind are enormously amplified. And she can pick up a book and just turn pages, and all the content of the book is now grasped. She can look at a person and perceive layers of knowledge and do a medical diagnosis just by observing a few symptoms and things like that. She can go on the internet and scan pages rapidly and absorb all the knowledge. Her power of logic and intellect, analysis and induction and deduction are all enormously amplified until, and she makes it her goal here. I should not speak of the end of the movie, but in terms of the faculty itself, until it reaches what would be something like a total human knowledge. And that's what she is struggling to attain before her body entirely collapses from the side effects of the drug itself. And it's for her like something she can get to and give to humanity as a gift. But that's the direction in which the movie goes. But you get here a glimpse of how humanity tends to conceive of the potential of the human mind. Because after all, this kind of functioning is not impossible to us. It's just taking the existing functions to their limit, to an ideal. See, innately, all of our faculties and functions, we tend to look in terms of their ideal. Human love, we tend to place in some kind of a reference of an ideal love. Human strength, we try to perceive as an ideal possibility in, again, in comics, in science fiction, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man. They are all as if pushing to a limit of a capacity which is already there in us. And pushed to that limit, it's as if we can do anything. And that is the fulfillment of that capacity. So he uses this term for the sake of convenience, the ideal faculty, precisely because in the way he has described this higher functioning of the buddhi, it is literally the current intellectual working pushed to its limit and reaching its highest peak, where it is capable of everything that it should be able to do as we sense in our idealism. But this stands to the developed intellect much in the same relation as the intellect stands to the half animal reason of the undeveloped man. So let's look at the examples of what we see in undeveloped human beings, in certain semi-animal, semi-barbaric, sometimes tribal, not always. Sometimes there are tribes which are more sophisticated in their development of humanity, but mostly it is in the domain of the barbaric humans. And it doesn't matter if they live in fancy houses with bank accounts, they may still be quite barbaric in their consciousness. We see there a certain crude development of humanity. And in relation to that, if we place the scientist or the philosopher as we ideally conceive them to be, and we see this huge gap. And for the barbarian to now grow into this kind of an intellectual development is not even always possible, at least not in a single lifetime. That would be the kind of relationship from the well-developed intellect to this ideal faculty. And if we were to see in rational terms, perhaps, then it may not be possible for us to develop this even in a single lifetime, unless the faculty itself is somehow able to assist the process. And this is really the secret of much of the integral yoga, that we rely not so much on our own personal effort in attaining to a higher possibility, but we seek to draw down a help from above which helps us attain to that possibility with far greater ease because of the help than by our own effort. And so it is possible perhaps, and this is the nature of the yoga, to accelerate the process, speed it up, compress the steps to attain to this kind of an ideal working of this faculty. It becomes evident also what is the nature of the purification which is necessary before the understanding can fulfill rightly its part in the attainment of right knowledge. When he says it becomes evident as a result of the discussion where he has differentiated this working of the ideal faculty from the other parts and the mixtures. So we can say now it becomes evident. And what is evident is the purification involves separating from the mixtures of these parts, so that the understanding can fulfill rightly its part in the attainment of knowledge. And so we realize the attainment of knowledge in a normal human experience involves many parts. Each of these parts has a specific function. So our senses are supposed to only transcribe what they receive and convert them into something which the sense mind can observe. The sense mind's job is simply to observe and record. But if the sense mind now starts trying to make judgments because of past habit, then the perception itself is clouded. Just because once, as a child, I ate a chili by mistake and I had a painful experience, thereafter every time I see the color green, if my sense mind says, oh, chili, burning, heat, run away, then it has transgressed the limit of its proper functioning. It is only meant to pass on what it sees, and there is a higher faculty which is meant to do the proper judgment. So we see the sequence, the hierarchy, and the proper functioning of these parts. And this higher faculty of understanding has to play its rightful part in the sequence. And now he summarizes the nature of the purification. All impurity is a confusion of working, a departure from the dharma. So he's making a very general statement, and this will apply now to all the parts of our being in all circumstances. Whenever we use the word impurity in the context of the integral yoga, it means this confusion of working, departure from the dharma. And what is the dharma, proper dharma of that part? the just and inherent right action of things, which in that right action are pure and helpful to our perfection. And this departure is usually the result of an ignorant confusion of dharmas, in which the function lends itself to the demand of other tendencies than those which are properly its own. So whenever a part drifts away from its proper and natural functioning, its inherent right action of things, and takes on the functions of other parts before or after it in the sequence, or other parts intrude into it their impulses, then this just and inherently right action of things is disturbed. There is a mixture of dharmas. This part is trying to operate on that function. That part is trying to operate in this function, and so on. And there is an ignorant confusion of dharmas. Here he puts a footnote, which is samkara, the Sanskrit word samkara, confusion of dharma. This is an idea which is very strongly highlighted in the Bhagavad Gita, where Sri Krishna stresses the need to follow one's innate dharma and not allow a mixture, a conflict of dharmas. But it is also the nature of life that as a human being, because we ourselves are made of many parts, we have many relationships with different people, with different circumstances. There is a unique dharma with each of those relationships from each of these parts. But because all of these have to function as one individual, inevitably there is an overlap and there is a mixture, which leads to the dharma samkara, the mixture of dharma, the confusion of dharma, and the mess that we generally end up in life. We're always trying to compromise, to balance between two different needs, and at the end of the day, neither of the needs is properly met, and everything becomes an increasing confusion. But this is exactly what's happening inside us among all the different parts of our own being, and especially here in the working of our mind. So this is the correction to be made, this removal of the confusion of working and the recovery of the just and inherent right action, the dharma. Now he describes three causes of impurity. The first cause of impurity in the understanding is the intermittence of desire in the thinking functions. And desire itself is an impurity of the will involved in the vital and emotional parts of our being. So we are looking at only purification of the understanding. Once the understanding is reasonably purified, it can turn upon those other parts and assist in their greater purification, which in turn will help its own purification, and so on. But this is really our starting point. To be able to purify the understanding sufficiently that it creates a center in us in which we can know what is best and then apply that rightly. But the first impurity in the understanding is the mixture of desire in the thinking functions. And so, even though our understanding knows what we should do, it is unable to do because it is compelled by the desire. The very popular saying, the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak. And by spirit here is meant precisely this, not the spiritual dimension. It is this mental part of us which is able to stand back and observe and know what is right. I know what is right, but somehow I'm unable to do because of the compulsion of the desire. And so we have to separate the desire from this, which he will describe shortly. How? But before that, he observes that desire itself involves a mixture, an impurity of the will involved in the vital and emotional parts of our being. So the will is a different power from the vital and emotional parts, The will rightly has a different functioning. When that gets mixed with the vital and emotional parts, we have a will that is driven by the emotions and not a pure free will. That is what we call desire. And that desire compels us, enters the mind, clouds the mind's judgment, and drives even the mind's working in the direction that it chooses. When the vital and emotional desires interfere with the pure will to know, the thought function becomes subservient to them, pursues ends other than those proper to itself and its perceptions, are clogged and deranged. So the pure will to know has its station in the mind. Now he is making a distinction between different facets of the pure will. There is a will to know, which is one facet. There is a will to action, which is another facet. There is the will to love, which is another facet. And these are the three impulses which form the basis of the triple path, the path of knowledge, the path of works, and the path of love. But all three are three different facets of an innate essential will. So here it is the pure will to know which is seated in the mind, and the vital and emotional desires interfere with this, and automatically the thought function becomes pulled by them, subservient to them, and what they choose become its ends. Pursues ends other than those proper to itself and its perceptions are clogged and deranged. And Sri Aurobindo uses these words very carefully. The clogging is when the perception is unable to see beyond a little bit. I see a little, but like a drain that is clogged, some water goes through, but not everything. And the other distortion is deranged. It functions in an unbalanced manner, loses sense of perspective and limits. So let's take an example. When a person is extremely angry, there is this whole confusion of the passion that comes. And at that time, even if you try to explain something, the person seems to understand what you explain, but is unable to act upon it because, in fact, the full import of what is explained is not absorbed. The form of it is caught, but the meaning of it is not caught. Yes, I know what you're saying. You're saying this, and yet, because I'm angry, this is somehow compelling. And on the other side, we see the derangement, all the proportions are forgotten. There is an exaggeration, breaking beyond limits. I feel in my anger that I can do anything, I can overcome anything. If I shout, I can set right all the problems. And after the heat of the anger passes, when the mind once again becomes quiet, we immediately begin to regret. Why did I say that? Why did I do that? And also, now I understand what you were trying to tell me, but at that moment I got carried away. So the perceptions are clogged and deranged. And so the correction here is the understanding must lift itself beyond the siege of desire and emotions. And in order that it may have perfect immunity, it must get the vital parts and emotions themselves purified. So there are two stages to this. First, this understanding lifting itself beyond the siege of desire and emotions. And one can do that again and again. Inevitably, later on, the desires will creep in, tend to overwhelm, and again, the understanding has to separate itself. So the immunity will come when the vital parts and emotions are purified. Then those parts will not compel by their desires. So that comes as a second stage. So the first stage is the separating, so that at least in my understanding I stand free. Later, that understanding turns upon the vital and emotional parts to help them purify. And after that, there is a secure relationship. And the danger of the mixtures can actually be practically nullified. But this standing above, how is one to do that? There are several methods which briefly he will summarize at the end. But the essence of it is, at first at least, the ability of this part to stand back from anything. This observing intellect, buddhi in us, inherently has the power to stand back from anything, including itself. We can observe our own minds working. And if we practice, we find we can do it more and more effectively. If we can observe our own minds working, then to be able to observe the emotions or the working of the senses is even easier. And this is where the refinement, the civilizing influence comes in. You will see the first step in any culturing in civilization is to be able to restrain impulses. And in the very act of restraining, something has to step back, stand above. And a part of the mind at least disengages to refuse to allow those impulses. And that's where the first training begins. We tell the children, when you get upset, well, put your hands in your pocket, breathe deeply, count to 10, and then you can do what you like. But if you've done that for those 10 seconds, then the impulse of the anger has already weakened, and you realize that you can control the rest of it, and so on. But even to be able to count to 10 and put your hands in your pocket, a part of you at that point should stand back from the anger, disengage, and say, first I will put my hand in my pocket, then only I will accept to be angry. So it has already got separate. So there is in us inherently a part that is able to stand back. The secret is to be able to make it develop a habit of standing back. The mother has recommended an exercise, and she recommended this in her classes in the playground, where there was a mix of children as well as sadhaks. And she recommended this exercise. It sounds very simple, but it does not only this, but much more in the long run. She says, at the end of the day, observe carefully the whole day in a very calm, quiet way, in a detached poise, without seeing it as a personal life, but as if observing someone else's life. Observe your thoughts, your feelings, your actions. And then she says, put them in reference to your central aspiration. And immediately there is a kind of a sifting, a separation. This is closer, that is farther. This is in alignment with, that is in contradiction with my central aspiration. You just observe. There is no judgment, there is no criticism, there is just an observation. And then, if you like, you can gather all of the day and offer it. But the key in correcting, in changing oneself is when you observe something in contradiction to your central aspiration, you can put a will. Next time, I will do it differently. Now, she does not elaborate too much, because once one starts doing this, these things tend to happen automatically. But if we were to elaborate, we could see that on the one hand, you can strengthen the positive movements, things which are in alignment with your central aspiration. You can say, oh, this is so much more enjoyable, I must give it more time. But it will happen automatically, even if you don't think about it. Because you enjoy it more, you're conscious that this is more valuable, you will automatically tend to give it more time. On the other hand, those things which contradict your central aspiration, you don't find them so interesting anymore in the very act of observing. But you can assist the process by choosing to modify. So whenever somebody insults my behavior or my appearance or my intelligence or whatever it is which I'm sensitive to, I get upset. And I observe this happening, and just in this one day I've observed it happen 3 times. But you can observe more minutely and observe how that irritation develops. At what point the words he spoke began to create a disturbance, how the disturbance grew, and you were trying to restrain yourself, and at what point you lost control. Just observe the process. In the very act of observing, you are becoming conscious. In the act of becoming conscious, you gain a certain control. But you just observe. And then you put a will. Next time, when I sense this is what I will do. You reprogram your mind by putting an alternate response. Instead of getting upset, I will simply smile and say, thank you, and politely walk away. So I program myself, imprint that thought, put a will, and then having offered the day, go to sleep. Now she doesn't explain all this, but the effect of doing this before sleeping is that whatever you have observed, imprinted and willed, goes deep into your subconscious. It acts in those layers precisely where the correction is needed, where you're not conscious, where the impulses come from. And then you will find within 2 or 3 days, it doesn't take longer. Even as that tendency, that impulse begins to rise, something from within spontaneously kicks in and says, this is what I wanted to catch. This is what I wanted to change. And maybe it still slips a couple of times, but generally within a few days, you find you're able to intervene and change the pattern. Still, you need to persist until the new pattern now becomes a habit. But this very simple exercise, over a few weeks, can completely reorganize and reprioritize the working of your day and the behavior and the thoughts, feelings, and actions of your nature. It's a very effective means for reshaping your whole personality and your character if taken seriously and pursued in this way. But you see, in this exercise, the standing back and asserting a free choice on precisely those parts to which normally we are subject. And here we look at the parts, the siege of desire and emotions. So if I'm not able to lift myself in the period when I'm angry to stand above, I can still separate myself after the anger has passed. At the end of the day when my mind is calm, and thus imprint the habit of separation in my consciousness. And the result is within a few days, as the anger rises, this part of my mind is able to stand back. The same observing part which is now cultured at the end of the day comes forward, stands above, and then at some point it can even refuse the anger. So this separating, lifting beyond the siege of desire and emotion, and then later for perfect immunity, the vital and emotional parts to get purified. And now when this kind of a thing happens, a separation takes place, we still have to see what is the rightful role of those vital parts. The rightful role of the emotions, because the understanding we have seen its rightful role is to be able to observe and judge. But what are these parts with which it is mixed? Because they also have their rightful role, which they were trying to fulfill when the mixture was taking place. But because there was a mixture, not only the understanding was harmed, but their rightful role was also harmed. So in the beauty of Sri Aurobindo's description is that he gives each of these parts their clear functioning. And as we understand these, we begin to observe in ourselves that functioning, and automatically a kind of a purification begins to happen. So what is it that the vital part is intended to do? He says, the will to enjoy is proper to the vital being. Of all the parts of our nature, where principally do you experience enjoyment? The senses register. The mind can give values, but the thing which enjoys is this in between, the vital being. It is there that the push of energy says, oh, this is such fun, this is so wonderful. So the will to enjoy is proper to the vital being, but not the choice or the reaching after the enjoyment, which must be determined and acquired by higher functions. So he's separating the enjoyment proper from the choice of enjoyment and the reaching after the enjoyment. The choice and the reaching after belong to higher faculties. What does that mean? In our normal life experience, the mixed experience, when we enjoy something, in the enjoyment itself is the habitual response of choice that says, I enjoy this, but I refuse to enjoy that. I like this food, but I don't like that food, and I cannot enjoy the other food. So, because my vital nature enjoys this food, and I give it the choice, the power of choice, it only eats the food that I enjoy, it rejects the food that I don't enjoy. If now you give me the food that I don't enjoy, what happens? The vital part has to rebel, it has to get upset, it has to lose its power of enjoyment. And since its function is to enjoy, it has lost its dharma. So this is the mixture of choice. And the other is reaching after. I like this, but I like that more, at least for now, for today. Tomorrow it will change. But right now I like that more, so I need to reach out and grab that. The craving, the need for something which is beyond my reach, again makes the vital unable to enjoy what is already there. Therefore, the vital being must be trained to accept whatever gain or enjoyment comes to it in the right functioning of the life, in obedience to the working of the divine will, and to get rid itself of craving and attachment. So very simply stated program for the rest of our life. But it's not so difficult when we pursue it with persistence, and we can come to a practical functioning freedom of this part. So the vital being must be trained first to accept whatever gain or enjoyment comes to it in the right functioning of the life. So let's start with food. Whatever food comes, you have to accept as this is the food given, and my rightful relationship with this food is to properly enjoy it. So even if I have a past habit of not enjoying something, I must now train the vital to accept it and then to enjoy it. In obedience to the working of the divine will, this adds a deeper dimension. I can say, well, this is what life gave me, or I can say, there is a divine will in which there is a proper functioning, and as a part of that, this is the food which has been given to me, and I can accept that. By bringing in this higher dimension of the divine will and the relationship with the divine in the specific forms of things that come, our relationship with those things changes much more profoundly. It's no more a resigned acceptance, oh well, it's again the same food, whether I like it or not, I have to train myself. Instead of that, you can bring a deeper dimension and say, as you sit in the dining room, this is the food that the mother has given to me. And how would you have eaten if the mother gave you a sour apple and you know you don't like sour apples? And if the mother has given it, you will take it as a prasad. And as a prasad, whether you like it or not, you enjoy what she has put in it. You enjoy the fact that she has given it. And perhaps your senses still react, but you have a different meaning given to the food. And in principle, one can bring this feeling into anything, into everything. And so this brings a much deeper dimension and helps to free much more easily. If in that part, in the vital, there is already an opening to the divine, and one can bring into that opening this sense that all this that comes right now is given to me by the divine will in a larger function, then that part can open much more easily and overcome its tendency, earlier tendency. And what is the earlier tendency to be got rid of? To rid itself of craving and attachment. And again, you can observe minutely, the craving is when you have something which you have to reach out to get. So let's say it's the middle of the morning, I've already had my breakfast, I'm not yet close enough to lunchtime, and somebody is eating ice cream. It's hot. And just by habit, I have an association of needing something cold when it's hot. I look at the ice cream and there's a craving. If only I could also get, can I get it? So there was a time when maybe when we were children, you had parents who would say, no, not now. Or there was a time when there was a financial distress, or there was a time when ice cream shops were not next door to you. So you had to perforce control your greed. But nowadays things are so much easier. You just have to walk a little bit more. You just have to click on the internet and the goods are delivered to your home. So there is this habit of instant gratification that has developed. So we don't even think about it. It's possible, we do it, that's it. It's only when we face more serious issues that we realize that we have not overcome the craving. But ideally, one should be able to enjoy the fact that someone enjoys it without needing a personal craving to also participate in it. One of the formulas which might be helpful for some is whenever you see somebody do something and it bothers you, stand back and observe the person is happy to do it, whether I have it or not. Here is one part of the universe, my universe, in which somebody is happy to do something. And there's a Sanskrit saying, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, may all beings be happy. It's an invocation from the Veda. May all beings be happy. And here's somebody who is happy to do what they're doing. I'm happy about it. So I stand back in a larger vision. The whole universe is myself, or I'm a part of the whole. I want to be happy. And if somebody is happy, that's already one step in the larger I that has to be happy. And this little I also will find its own balance and happiness, or it can find happiness in the fact that someone is happy. So one can correct for our perception by widening the scope of our sense of identities, widening the vision in which we see things, and rather than feeling jealous, rather than craving, rather than getting upset, you observe that and say, oh, nice, I'm so glad you're happy. I hope something good comes of your efforts, wonderful. And immediately, with this kind of an attitude, the whole world becomes much simpler. It's easy to overcome also these cravings. So the first part is getting rid of cravings. The other part is getting rid of attachments. And that's not just craving which is reaching out for what you don't have. The attachment even acts on what you have. This is mine. If it is taken away from me, it's like there's a string attached. It's pulling me with it. I'm attached to it. If it moves around a little bit there, I move with it. So I have a friend who used to, whose job it was to play in the stock market. And he would tell me that every morning I can see on people's faces whether the stocks have gone up or down. It's like what's happening in the stock market is tied to you with a string. And when the stocks go up, your smile widens. When the stocks go down, your smile turns down. So you're like a puppet being pulled by these attachments of different things. And we need to free from that. And so you see already what is behind all this, a kind of a stepping back into a freedom, a wideness, equality, silence, quieting from agitation, etc. So all this he will describe later. The foundation will be equality. So there's the training of the vital being towards these directions. So again, rereading the sentence. Therefore, the vital being must be trained to accept whatever gain or enjoyment comes to it in the right functioning of the life, in obedience to the working of the divine will, and to rid itself of craving and attachment. Similarly, the heart must be freed from subjection to the cravings of the life principle and the senses, and thus rid itself of the false emotions of fear, wrath, hatred, lust, etc., which constitute the chief impurity of the heart. So remember, he was speaking of the mixture of desire and emotions. So the vital being we've seen is meant to enjoy. In the vital being, there is the freedom from the desire, attachment, craving, and the heart itself, the emotional part, to be freed from subjection to the cravings of the life principle and the senses, and thus rid itself of false emotions. So we have in our emotions similarly a craving that in our emotions we value things perceived through the senses. We have cravings for certain feelings that we expect from others. For example, having done so much, spent so much time to help somebody, I expected that he would at least acknowledge and say thank you. Perhaps he would put my name on the work that he was doing and put an acknowledgement, whatever it is. There's an expectation that because you are my friend, this much you should have done. Because I have done this for you, you must at least be grateful, and so on. So in its more crude forms, you see among teenagers, and Mother describes these various kinds of response of love. They start with a certain experience of what may be called falling in love, but the nature of that relationship is often a very strong possessiveness and attachment, where you say that I will love you as long as you do what I want. And this is somehow inherent in all human relationships of any kind of affection. It's more obviously seen in crude form in those teenagers, but otherwise it's there everywhere. It's one of the reasons why we appreciate pets, particularly dogs, so much, because they seem to love you without any condition. Of course, there is always the expectation that you're going to look after it, feed it, etc., but still. Otherwise, they just give themselves to you with a lot of affection, and that itself has a healing effect. They teach you that you can love without expectation, that you can be happy without any reason. And that's the reason why you will find among many children who have pets, often they develop a much more healthy emotional being. So, in the first relationship, there is a claim, expectation, and if the expectation is not fulfilled, now I don't love you anymore. So, and then Mother says there is a higher expression of that where it goes like, I will love you as long as you love me. So the expectation is not so much of personal gain, but of a mutuality. What's the point of loving you if you don't love me back? So it's a very practical transactional love, but still of a higher grade than the first one. And then she says above that there is one which says, well, I love you whatever the reason, whatever you may do or not do, this is how I am. And here one comes closer to the true nature of love. And you will see the image always given in the yogic tradition is you observe the sun. The sun gives itself to all things, all beings, all creatures equally. It doesn't care what you give back. It doesn't care that you acknowledge or not. You can shout abuses at the sun, spit at it, but it will continue to radiate its light on you just as before. And yet, and this is the way the symbolism at least is played in some devotional traditions, the sun is burning. It is suffering intensely. It is consumed by the fire. And although it is suffering and consumed by its own intensity, it still gives to the whole world its radiance, its love, selflessly, equally. Such should be ideally the true nature of love, but it's still far. We look at it at least at the first step. The heart must be freed from subjection to the cravings of the life principle and the senses. We crave things, we need things, and even with the senses, we crave certain comforts. If those comforts are not there, we react in anger or in fear or in hatred. If certain things are there, we have attractions of strong desires or lusts by which we are compelled to need those things. So all these are distortions, and thus the heart must rid itself of the false emotions of fear, wrath, hatred, lust, etc. Now, why are these false emotions? If you observe how our emotions function, what is the nature of fear? A strong pulling back from something. What is the nature of wrath, anger? A strong outburst of energy towards something. What is hatred? An intense uh, attraction to separation from. If you observe, I hate someone, it is, I love to hate that person. It is like a magnet. My hatred keeps returning again and again to that person. I can't stop thinking obsessively about the person that I hate. And you see, there is an attraction very similar to love. But the nature of the attraction is as if twisted. I want not to have anything to do with this one thing that I'm obsessed with. There's a twist, there's a reversal of what love would have been like. So if you observe the nature of fear, wrath, hatred, lust, there's always a strong connection with something, but a twist in the way you are relating to that something. And so Sri Aurobindo writes in his Thoughts and Aphorisms, he says that I don't have the exact words, but the idea is this, that a strong hatred towards something is always a sign of a secret attraction. Because something within you is drawn to that, therefore you obsessively turn to it, and because something in you does not want to engage with that, there is hatred or fear or wrath or whatever form it takes. So these are not true emotions. They are a true emotion which is warped, twisted to become a different kind, an emotion, something which looks like an emotion, but it is a false emotion. What would be true emotion? For the heart, the true relationship is always love and shades and colors and variations of love. So this is what he comes to now. So by this process, when the heart is freed from this, it rids itself of the fear, wrath, hatred, lust, etc., which constitute the chief impurity of the heart. So when all those things are removed, what is it that's the true function? The will to love is proper to the heart. Just as the will to enjoy is proper to the vital being, the will to love is proper to the heart. But here also, the choice and reaching after love have to be foregone or tranquilized. And the heart taught to love with depth and intensity indeed, but with a calm depth and a settled and equal, not a troubled and disordered intensity. So the same pattern follows with the heart, which we have discussed with the vital being. So what's the relationship between heart and vital being? The vital being would be, strictly speaking, the part in us which is made of the pure life force, the life energy itself. The heart is a formation which is on the higher part of the vital being, which is partly of a mental awareness, but of the character of the life energy, and as a formation of a center, which then radiates, reaches out, relates. And its proper functioning is the will to love. But the choice and reaching after love have to be changed. And how are they to be changed? He uses three words. They have to be foregone or tranquilized. And the heart taught to love with depth and intensity, which is calm, settled, and equal. So, the, whenever Sri Aurobindo gives a sequence, where he gives several options, we can see each of those separately, but in the sequence in which he places them is also the psychology of how we grow. So the first step, we have to forego, as if, the choice and the reaching after love. Now, this is the part which is relatively the most important for training. If you can learn to forego, then you can tranquilize more easily. Just as when we start developing equality, often at first it is a stoicism which is your first base before the true equality can emerge. It gets free from the first reaction of the old habit. Once that is cleared, then gradually a transformation can take place. So there is the heart's love wants to choose. I love this, but not that. I love the flowers and the fruits, but I do not love the snakes and the scorpions in my garden. So very clear choice is made, and the result is when I do not have the flowers and fruits, when I see the snakes and the scorpions, well, I have a reaction, and so on. Or the reaching after love. This is my favorite vase which somebody is taking away. Oh, I cannot allow you to take it. I must claim it back. This is where I keep my book always. And if you move it away from here, something within me gets restless and I'm not satisfied until I bring it back to my normal place in which I keep it. There's a whole book which takes this as its title, Who Moved My Cheese? I don't know if you've read it, but it plays on this idea that we get restless when somebody interferes in our settled routine of the day. And then we crave for a correction, bringing back what is taken away, what is lost, and so on. The reaching after love, and especially when it takes the form of other human beings, those whom I love have now abandoned me, have betrayed my trust, betrayed my love, have now gone away, and so I suffer, or have died, and now they are gone permanently, and so I suffer even more. And strangely enough, while they were alive, I might have met them perhaps once a year. When it was Father's Day or Mother's Day, I phoned up or sent a card. And then when they suddenly go away, then it hits me painfully. And it takes me weeks to recover. And if only at that point we think that, well, they just shifted from one country to another, except that country is on a subtler plane. It's the same thing. It's not a big deal. And yet, what is it that causes the pain? There is actually a bond, like a cord of energy, which binds us in our relationships. And when a separation takes place, let's say a failure in romantic love, or the death of somebody whom we love, the cord is actually torn apart. And there is even, if one can see in the subtle body, a kind of a bleeding which is felt. And it takes a time for the wound to heal. And this is the reason why it is so painful. They say a divorce is like a little death, because it's as if you had connected with somebody, joined, and then you are ripped apart. You break because this connection is broken. And it's like you have to rebuild yourself and start afresh. At least it feels like that. In the emotional part, in the heart, not everywhere else. But because this emotional part now spreads into the mind and the body and the senses, it somehow pulls everything else into its suffering, struggle, and agitation. And so we constantly need to reach after love to fill the gap and bring back the balance of what is now our comfort zone of the heart. So the choice has to be foregone. Reaching after love has to be foregone. And what does that mean? Whatever comes before me, I must accept and love. Maybe not in the same way, not with the same intensity, but still I should be able to do that. It's relatively easy to understand this when we look at a situation where we are teachers with a whole bunch of children. And let's say you're a you're a kindergarten teacher, and you have about 20 children in your class every year. And you can open your heart to them quite safely. Unlike adults, children are much more free in their heart, more true in their expression. They don't hurt you back so easily. So you can open your heart and build that relationship of love, and then they go away the next year. And a whole fresh set of children will come, and you can continue the same way. Those who go away, briefly there's a wistfulness, a longing, but they are in the next class. It's not so painful. And one day they grow up, they've gone away, and you look at them and you say, oh, so and so was my student, you're proud of it. So the color of the love changes, the form of the relationship changes, but it can still remain. And there's always this fresh patch that comes. So one can look at it in that way with all human beings. In principle, it should be possible, at least to a certain degree, not with a certain depth and intensity, but at least a superficial love is possible. So we choose, we reject the choice, and then we reject the craving, the need, the reaching after. So that choice and reaching after are foregone or tranquilized. And this is now a deeper change where you teach your heart to become calm, to become quiet. And then when from the calm there is a radiance of love, the agitation, the pull and push, and the drama associated with the emotions, they are not there anymore. And what comes, you can accept, give your love, and when it goes, you say goodbye with love. An easier example here will be when you look at flowers. Every morning, a fresh set of flowers, and you can pour your love on them. At the end of the day, they have wilted, and with the same love, you can gather them the next day and put them in the manure bin. But you still love. But now the relationship has changed, it goes away into the past, and a fresh set of flowers come. It's more impersonal, you can feel there's a calm and a quiet in the way the heart relates to them, because the flowers themselves bring a certain quiet and purity in their vibration, even a psychic vibration they bring. So foregone or tranquilized, and the heart taught to love with depth and intensity indeed, but with a calm depth and a settled and equal, not a troubled and disordered intensity. So this is the third part, which is the most difficult. You have to teach the heart to be able to love with depth and intensity. All this was easy because it was somewhat superficial, not very deep, not very intense. But now when you bring depth and intensity, and you can start with flowers, because that is the purest and perhaps most safe, but start to practice in this way, that you take a few flowers, if you have the time, you arrange them, offer them to the divine in that arrangement, and as you pick each flower, you relate to it from your heart with love, with an intensity, with a gratitude, and place it in arrangement, and the whole arrangement itself you can relate now with that depth and intensity. And then you offer it to the divine, towards whom is the true object of the love. And the flowers are only the vehicle through which you offer to the Lord. But the depth has to be calm and settled and equal. So with each form of flower, it has to be equal, maintaining its calm base of settling. And then from there, once this habit is ingrained, you can turn your gaze out towards humanity and look at all human beings like flowers. Each is carrying a flower in their heart, their own psychic being. And in your mind, you think of that to which you're relating, in the same way as you relate to the heart. And so as an exercise, it's just shifting the focus to the flowers, the psychic beings in the hearts of each, and you relate the same way. And then it's not as difficult. And if the habit is set, the pattern is set, one can relate in this way more easily. But this is a cultivation which needs to be worked upon. And then the intensity is more tricky. The depth, which is calm, is easier. The intensity is for us always associated with a certain agitation. Try to intensify your energies and you'll find automatically they start becoming more agitated, more disturbed. It's difficult to maintain intensity on a base of calm. And this requires training. In any emotion, in any utilization of force, when the force is weak, it is easy to maintain calm. When the force increases, we are unable to control it because it is larger, more powerful than us. And so the only way by which one can hold intensity without being disturbed is by ourselves becoming wide and deep. When our consciousness is larger than the force which we wield, then we are able to wield it more easily. When the force is stronger than our own consciousness, then we find it difficult to hold or guide it. So the first step when we work on the calm depth, there has to come with the calm depth a wideness. And it is the wideness which allows the intensity to be held without the troubled and disordered expression. Now you see all of this summarizes to something very simple. A station of standing back in equality, which is calm and which is wide. And from that base of calm and wide equality, the heart radiates a love which is tranquil, equal, and intense. And the vital being is able to enjoy quietly, equally, and even with intensity. But the foundation is common for both. So now Sri Aurobindo is summarizing this whole process, and he says the tranquilization and mastery of these members is a first condition for the immunity of the understanding from error, ignorance, and perversion. Remember, our goal is still purification of this understanding, not so much of the heart, for which the understanding has to stand back from the heart and the vital nature be purified eventually. So, for this purification of the vital being and heart, tranquilization and mastery is a first condition. And in the footnote, he gives reference to two Sanskrit words, Shama and Dhamma. This is in the traditional yogic teaching, Vedantic training. Wherever Sri Aurobindo puts a footnote with a Sanskrit reference, he is showing you the connections with the whole body of traditional knowledge. With a single word, you will find a whole training program, exercises, different systems and methods, use them in different ways. So you can now see all that body of knowledge and it is placed in a certain context. So we need not go too much into that because the methods used in the integral yoga are also different. But where necessary, we can draw on those traditional things also. Shama is the quieting, stilling, and it is used particularly in the context of a desire which is satisfied or satiated, a fire that is calmed or put out and fulfilled, a need which is now fulfilled. So Shama has this idea of tranquilizing where there is a certain intensity or a need, and Dhamma is the coming upon on top, asserting a greater freedom, mastering. So this briefly Sri Aurobindo summarizes with these two words, tranquilization, and mastery. And even in the traditional knowledge, the Shama and Dhamma are used in the context of the emotions and the senses to tranquilize and to master emotions and senses. So this is the first condition for the immunity of the understanding from error, ignorance, and perversion. And consider how important it is for our buddhi to be free of error, to be free of ignorance and perversion. As long as these destabilizing tendencies exist in through the intermittence of desire, there will always be these things inevitably. To be able to free the understanding from the desire, we have to now separate desire itself into these two powers of the vital being, which needs to enjoy, and the heart, which must love. Purifying the enjoyment, purifying the love, separating the understanding from these two, now brings the right relation between these parts. This purification spells an entire equality of the nervous being and the heart. Equality, therefore, even as it was the first word of the path of works, so also is the first word of the path of knowledge. And so here we come to the base, the equality, which is our foundation. You will see later in the yoga of self-perfection, which we have already studied, he brings equality as one of the first necessity of the yoga of self-perfection. There is a layer of purification upon which the formal process of the yoga of self-perfection begins. So all that we are discussing would be included in that first purification. But then the equality itself is the first practice of the yoga of self-perfection, and it is also the thing which makes perfect the purification of the other parts. So this is in fact one of the most fundamental bedrocks of the whole integral yoga. Equality, therefore, even as it was the first word of the path of works, so also is the first word of the path of knowledge. And with this, he completes the first cause of impurity in the understanding, which is the intermittence of desire in the thinking functions. Intermittence, the word describes an interpenetration, something seeping in like a liquid or a fog and spreading inside in a way that you cannot separate the two anymore. And this is the nature of the desire. It rises, let's say, in the subtle body, if we had to map it, the center of the expression of desire and the functioning of desire is in the region of the abdomen and the chest. In the abdomen, the lower form of the desire; in the chest, the higher form of desires and especially the emotions. But from there, when those parts are agitated, one can sense or see in the aura, in the subtle body, as if a cloud that rises. And when it hits the region of the heart, where the emotions are there, generally a person starts behaving in a manner which is illogical, emotionally distraught and disturbed, unstable, not calm anymore. But still the mind may be free enough that it can observe and say, this is not all right. But when that intermittence of the vibration, of the clouding rises above and then hits the head, then the buddhi itself is completely confused. We are unable to stand back, unable to recognize that this is not right or that we should stop or change this pattern of behavior. We are completely seized by it and a victim of that confusion. When the mind stands back, again one sees in the subtle body as if a light illumining which can repel this gas or this confusion, or the light spreading into it clears the way the sunlight dissipates the fog. And it clears the fog and brings calm and clarity into those parts from above, spreading until all the way to the sources from which the fog rises, and it clears it and brings quiet and stillness and calm clarity. So it's a struggle between these two parts, and the intermittence is this fog-like thing spreading in, which clouds the light of the mind. And so these words Sri Aurobindo uses very precisely, and they carry a whole backdrop of knowledge by the associations that the words bring. And now he takes up the second cause of impurity, which is the illusion of the senses and the intermittence of the sense mind in the thinking functions. But before we take that up, maybe we should pause here because it's a very different discussion. And we can take up any questions or any comments, anything you want to share. Sometimes when you feel yourself completely surrounded by darkness, you will notice you're aware that you're surrounded by darkness because there's some part in you which is not overwhelmed by it. That part which observes and says, oh, I'm surrounded by darkness, that is not yet in the darkness. If it was, it wouldn't know it. You understand? So you catch the part which is observing, which recognizes that there is a darkness around. And this part now you isolate. And you bring gradually more of yourself into this part. So here again is an exercise. Let's say right now you're surrounded by a feeling of pessimism, a hopelessness. I don't know what to do with my life. There's a problem everywhere. The finances are not all right. The friends are not all right. The work is not all right. The relationships are in a mess. What do? I see no hope. It's like the whole future has become dark and blank. And at that point, the person observing is not yet lost in it. And you say, I am observing this hopelessness. This same I can now turn in a call for help. Okay? Because it is not caught in the hopelessness. And so this same I observing consciousness turns up and invokes, makes a prayer, makes a puja, makes a whatever exercise, meditation, or something to help dissipate the darkness. Instead of fighting it directly, which might be too difficult, you would get simply overwhelmed. You ask for something higher to come and clear the way. So if you use this analogy, you are surrounded by a fog. If you try to push the fog around, you can't. But you can call the sun and call the rays of the sun to dissipate the fog. For that, you must look up to the sun and call it down. Okay? There's a very interesting prayer that the mother gave for invoking rain. And then she gave another prayer for stopping of the rain. And interestingly, for the prayer to invoke rain, it actively asks for the rain to come. But for the stopping of the rain, it doesn't say rain go away. It calls to the sun. O sun, who is our friend, dissipate the clouds, absorb the rain. We want your rays, we want your light. In French it is. But the call is to the positive thing, not to the negative to go away. The error we make is to start fighting the negative. Go away, you darkness. Go away, this mist. You're only exaggerating its importance. You focus on the positive which you want, of which you already have a sense. And I want more light. I want more clarity. I want more joy. and you open your heart to the source of that joy. And after a while, you begin to feel gradually something gently trickling in. It fills you. You may still be surrounded by the darkness, but it fills you. And within your mind and heart, there's a greater clarity and light. And after a while, when that grows enough, you begin to see through the darkness. You begin to see beyond it, and so on. Mother always advised highlighting, intensifying the positive rather than fighting the negative. That has its place also, but in these situations, that's the easiest way. Yes. When you find yourself trapped in a wheel, something you're driven in a cycle, you're unable to break free. At that point, the principle would be the same. You would still ask for help from above, but the nature of the help can be different. It may be here that not that you lack insight, but that you lack the will, the energy to break free. And so, what you will call will be both the insight to show what is the right thing to do, but much more the energy to exercise to do it. Very often, when we find ourselves trapped in a cycle of a routine, unable to break free, you know what you have to do to break free. You just don't have the push, the will to break free. And the thing which blocks the will is fear. As long as I'm in this rut, the wheel, I know where I'm going. Back to the same place, round and round. It's a safe, known space. If I break free, I'll suddenly be thrown into this unknown. I don't know if I'll be able to manage it. I might get overwhelmed. Right? So the fear is stronger than the force of will which wants to break free. I want to break free. I'm sick of this. I'm suffocating, but I'm unable to break free. Because to do it would be to enter into a greater uncertainty. At least so it seems right now. So the fear is stronger than the will which wants to break free. And the comfort zone is stronger than the will which wants to break free. So what comes from above when you call for the help is not only the clarity of what you should do, but also the energy to be able to break free, the confidence or the inner strength that I do what is to be done now. Just the strength would often be dangerous because you would do something, it would break the wheel, but it might not be the best, most effective action. And so, of course, you bumble along. But if you have the clarity as well as the strength, then you do precisely what is right. It's a very focused and effective action. Sometimes even that we find ourselves helpless in some of the biggest crises in life. And then we ask for the divine help to break the barriers for us. And it sometimes comes in the form of a sudden change in circumstances, even sometimes in the form of a crisis, but which breaks the barriers which you could not break. The most obvious example is in the life of Sri Aurobindo, when he was put in jail on false charges. And he was put in solitary confinement. He said for the first 15 days it was a hell. And he prayed to the Lord and said, I was doing your work. Why have you put me in this painful suffering? And then Sri Krishna told him, you remember a month ago I asked you to leave your work so that you could turn to something more important. And you could not leave because you were too attached. See, for him it was, if I leave this work, who will continue it? Will it continue? Will it work or not? And although the guidance was clear that he had to leave it, the attachment was too strong. And then Sri Krishna says, so I broke the bonds of your attachment and brought you into the isolation to do the sadhana. So it is often the case that when the inner soul knows what is needed, and even the outer personality is a trap. then the soul calls for the divine help, and the crisis comes as an act of grace, compelling the personality to overcome its limitations, to break through, to change, etc., etc. And the personality, that is I, who is this confused person, and says, I'm going through so much problem, so much difficulty, and somebody who's outside, who can see what is actually happening, will say, well, it's your soul which has caused this problem because you could not break through these difficulties. And I can see it's taking you to something very beautiful. It is the divine grace which is leading you. Don't worry, you will get there. And I say, what do you mean I'm suffering? So if we were more awake on the inner levels, we would see what is happening. And we would see that through this superficial suffering of my personality, there's something else which is being worked out in a greater purpose. And so you see this very clearly in the example of Sri Aurobindo's case, where the inner being could receive that guidance and was shown what was the journey, why this was necessary. Mhm. Mhm. Yes. Mhm. Yes. 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 It's sometimes difficult to make the choice. And sometimes we wonder even whether we have a choice, because when we are in a certain alignment with the divine consciousness, it seems as if anything is possible, everything is possible, and the ideal for which we are working is just there, just in front. We have only to make that effort and push forward. On a certain level, this is a deep truth, and it has to be valued for what it is. The mother always told that the new world, the new consciousness is just here at our gates. We have only to accept to open the gates. Or even if we don't open, we have only to call it and it will open the gates, even to that extent. But when in fact we begin to work in those directions, we discover things coming in the way which were not anticipated, which were not expected. Especially when the nature of the work that we are attempting will change the status quo. If the work is not changing status quo, if it will only make an incremental change in what is already there, things will get only slightly better, then the reaction is not so strong, and it is often allowed. But when the work will have a radical change in circumstances, then the forces which control the status quo, they rush in to protect their domain. Now we may call these forces hostile forces, negative forces, dark forces, but those words are not the best way to look at. Kirit Joshi once shared with us that when he spoke to the mother something, he said, hostile forces are coming in the way, something. And mother said very firmly, there are no hostile forces. And then she repeated, there are no hostile forces. And Kirit Joshi said, for me, from that point on, it's as if the hostile forces were gone. There are no hostile forces ever. But the vocabulary that the mother used to recognize this situation is sensors. And there are sensors whose job it is to check that what we are doing is made perfect. And what is not perfect, they knock until the weakness is exposed. That is a much more healthy approach to view these things. But the point being, when an attempt is made which will lead to a radical change, then there are all these things which come in the way, which try to test and ensure that what is being done is perfect, complete, or you have the right to do it. And it is at that time that we recognize our incapacity. We have the right intention, we have the goodwill, we have even the feeling of capacity, but when it moves into action, we find something is falling short. My knowledge was incomplete, or my strength was incomplete, or my desirelessness and purity of intention was incomplete, or my ego is still coming in the way a little bit and acting as a breaker to the free flow of the divine grace and its action, or the skill of my action is not yet perfected. Any of these things could happen. And to the extent that, of course, depending on the work, to the extent that these things are taken care of, the flow is direct and the action spontaneous and smooth. So if we are completely transparent, free of the ego, then that action can simply flow. It does the work. We just happen to be incidental at that point. But again, depending on the work required, our skill and the capacity of our skill may come in the way, our clarity of knowledge, receptivity, all these things may come in the way. Yes. Yes. So you have to recognize that there are many parts in us which mix in. So when we have a clarity of what is to be done, but the skill or the energy, something is lacking in it. So we have to wait, find the right opportunity, kind of navigate around the obstacles because we are unable to go right through because of the lack of the power aspect, etc. There will be parts in us which doubt whether the perception is right, which doubt whether we have the capacity, which doubt even the divine grace, whether the grace can overcome a situation like this. It seems as if. But you will notice these are parts, and there is a center of your awareness which knows, and then there are parts which doubt. And so you put them in their right place. You don't let them overwhelm you. This is what Aurobindo describes in the Record of Yoga as the Ashraddha, the anti-faith, the contrary faith, which sometimes overwhelms or tries to overwhelm. And you have to hold your space against it, at least hold your center, so that even after the initial overwhelming attack, you can once again push back and recover your space of the faith. And recognize that there are parts in us which are still mixed, and the Ashraddha, lack of faith, resides in those parts, and from there pops up and into those returns, until eventually the whole of our being is purified and filled with the Shraddha. And it's a process. We are making steady progress, that's all. Yes, yes, because we are instruments. To that extent, the effective action of the divine is dependent on us as instruments. Mhm. You see, when you hate something or someone, you will find there is something in you which is fascinated by that very thing. So yes, so when you hate an enemy, you might observe carefully and notice you admire the skill that the enemy possesses. They are somehow able to skillfully do what you could not do and overcome you in spite of your best capacity. And you admire that skill, or you admire their strength, or you admire their persistence, or you admire their, I would like to use the word arrogance, but it's actually self confidence. There's something there which you lack and which you admire in them. Of course, you do not like everything else, the purpose for which, or the form in which they do, or whatever it is. The point where you differ is the cause for the hatred. But the point which you admire is the cause for the obsessive turn of your attention. No. No, you're not required to love the jihadi, but you recognize that something in you is attracted to a skill that they have. Suddenly, out of the blue, this person is able to suddenly spread and do so many things against the whole resistance of the world. And there's something which you notice there. If you had that skill to do good, with the same effectivity, how much more you could have done perhaps, isn't it? And somehow you don't have that skill. So you don't love the jihadi for what he is doing. You don't love him for his intentions. You don't love him for his actions. But you recognize a skill only. And you love the soul within, which is a spark of the divine, which may be trapped by the darkness of the personality and the confusion of the personality. That is a different experience. So that's why when we speak of the heart to be able to love equally, it is not loving the form or the perversion of the form. It is loving the truth within the form, which is equal everywhere. Yes, it is not easy, but at least you can bring an equality that you do not allow hatred or anger to overwhelm you. I reject those actions. I put all my energies to counter those actions which are perverse and evil, but without a personal hatred of the persons or the institutions involved. I see them as forces which are playing out their game, and I see my role to oppose those forces in every way that I can. So it is kept at a level which is dispassionate, impersonal. At least that much we should be able to do. And then if we can center ourselves not in our personality and our emotions, but in something deeper of the psychic character or higher of a spiritual character, then we can see through the mask of those perversions and see behind or within it the human souls which are trapped, or even the left hand of God which is using that to serve a higher purpose, even as we fight to oppose those things. You see what I'm saying? You can see in that some purpose in the divine action, using those very things for some other good. Even though you have to oppose it, you recognize that it has served a purpose. So, no, you don't have to accept all the negativity as something to be accepted. You accept that they are there now. That much you can accept. But that they should not be, and that you have to work to overcome them. That is a different thing from accepting that they're actually there right now. That's just facing a fact, isn't it? You accept that they have a greater skill than you. That's how they could spread faster than you could spread. You accept that they're using a cunning and an intelligence and a skill. You understand the difference. But their intentions you do not accept. The form of their action you do not accept. Look at the jihadis, for example, who are currently doing all kinds of perverse things. If you go behind it all, of course, the form of it is the darkness, but the justification of it is in service to God. However perverted the understanding of their service to God, they say they do it for God. They do it to follow the teaching of their religion. You understand? They do it in the name of their religion. You may say their understanding of their religion is perverse. Their understanding of God's will is wrong. But you are still to admire their persistence to serve whatever they misunderstand. Isn't it? If we had their persistence from a more enlightened consciousness, imagine how much more we could have done. Mhm. Yes. Yes. The distinction you're making is that equality is not something to be achieved, but as foundation. Okay. Yes. Yeah, you can look at equality from a certain perspective that the divine in the foundations of the universe supports with an equality. Therefore, the whole universe can be so diverse, so rich, and so varied. Because the divine supports as a backdrop the canvas on which the painting takes place, the screen on which the cinema is projected, is equal to all colors, to all intensities of light and play. Okay? So, in the sadhana, therefore, the foundation of all our work is also that same equality. The foundation of all our action in the world is also that same equality. The foundation of our true perception and knowledge is also that equality. And the attainment of the equality, again, you can see as not something that you have to develop by form, by process, but rather something which is already there within you that you have to return to as your foundation. If you think of it in these terms, the whole thing seems so much simpler. True equality is founded in the state of the self. The self is equal. Everything which is not self or is power of self or movement of self or expression of self is in movement, is in play. And if you are lost in a fragment of that movement, you do not have equality. How do you get back equality? Well, you just step back from the movement and come to rest. The canvas behind the movement. Where is that canvas? Not there far away behind, not far away above. It is right here underlying this very movement. There's a state of stillness and equality of consciousness of self, which interpenetrates everything in the universe, including yourself, your mind, your heart. So if your mind just becomes quiet and conceives or meditates on the status of equality, it can simply come to rest in the equality of the self. And the same with the heart, the same with life energies and everything. So when you think of it like this, the equality is the backdrop already, and all you need to do is come back to rest in it. It's something very close and not difficult to attain. But it's also the foundation on which everything else can then flow out with full intensity without losing the balance. Mhm. Mhm. Yes. Right, right. Yes. Yes, the source of knowledge in the heart. But what do we mean by the heart? So there is a heart which is more superficial, emotional, and there is a deeper heart behind, concealed. That is the true source of knowledge. So in the Sri Aurobindo comments on this in his Secret of the Veda, where he is translating certain verses, and he says, in the Vedic conception, all knowledge emerges from the ocean of the heart, rises into the mind where it takes on the form of thought, and then is articulated in expression. So that's the way things move inside us. Yes. So there's a difference between the knowledge which comes from the psychic perception and the knowledge which comes from the intuitive consciousness. And the difference is this: the psychic knows from a personal perspective, it discriminates and senses between what is true and what is mixed, but it may not in the beginning be able to perceive the full picture. It knows at this moment in the immediate next step what is true, but it may not be able still to be able to hold the full picture unless it has developed to that. The intuitive consciousness is that which can see a larger uh, patch of knowledge. It may be still finite, but still it sees the knowledge in a flash, in a larger revealed patch. Not only what is immediate, but also what is after the immediate. And again, as the intuitive consciousness develops, it may see larger and larger, more and more continuously rather than infrequent flashes and so on. So there's a point where the two things merge. The psychic being brings with it the discrimination within the intuition itself. It brings the purity within the intuitive perception. The intuition brings the perception of knowledge on a larger scale and the understanding of the knowledge. If there was only the pure psychic working through the heart without the developed higher powers of the mind and intuition, it would be able to tell you this and not that. But why? I can't explain. It just feels right. That doesn't feel right. The intuition will bring the knowledge which can explain this is why it is so. So the two merge at some point. It's as if the psychic being in its development is ascending through the levels of consciousness, rises through the power development of the power of the intellect into the power of the intuition. And then it wields the power of intuition as its power. Just as presently it can wield the body, life force and mind as its instruments. So the next time we will look at the second cause of impurity in the understanding. And there again, what training we must give to the senses and the sense mind. And after that, the third cause of impurity, which is in the understanding itself because of its limitation. And these three, you will find, are extremely practical, which we can begin to apply in our own daily life. It just requires that we give it some time to observe ourselves and to make those small interventions to cultivate the changes that we seek to bring about. Yes, yes, feel free. Mhm. Okay. Yes. It's an interesting question when you see a basket with one bad fruit and a dozen good fruits. Why can't the good overwhelm the bad? That's because you're seeing the bad fruit as bad. That's your perception. But in nature, the spoilt fruit is not bad. It is manure for the next cycle of life processes. So the fruits are only going through stages of utility. There is a passage in which they are useful to human beings as food, and so we call that good. And once it's crossed that stage, we cannot use it for food, we call it bad. But for nature, it is now good for manure, good for recreating new patterns of life. So, in seen from a certain larger perspective, everything in nature is good. There is no bad really. The value of good, bad as a distinction comes from the human mind and its interests. If our mind now is helped to be free and the deeper understanding emerges, we begin to see things in this way, that we do not see anything in terms of good and bad, in terms of moral and ethical judgments, but we see things, all things leading towards the divine fulfillment, some more directly, some more slowly. But everything finally leads to the divine, and there's nothing which does not lead to the divine. Even things which seem to arrest the forward progress of evolution are in fact speeding up the evolution in a way they do not themselves recognize, and we can see how. So there's a very different way of looking at things when the consciousness shifts perspective. That's why the mother could say that the goal is inevitable, and even that it does not depend on human beings. But of course, its hastening will depend on our participation or not. Om. 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 Om.